Deep in the misty hollows of 1871 Alabama, where the Appalachian Mountains rise like silent sentinels, there existed a family so twisted, so shrouded in shadows, that the locals dared not speak their name. Whispers of unspeakable rituals, vanished travelers, and secrets buried beneath blood-soaked soil haunted the valleys. Children of the hill grew up in silence, eyes hollow, mouths sealed by fear. And something far older than man itself seemed to stir in the darkened woods. No outsider could enter their domain and live unchanged, and no letter ever left their cabin without carrying a warning hidden in its ink. Tonight, we unravel the story of the family that time almost forgot, a tale of obsession, madness, and horror that will leave your mind racing long after the last word. Disclaimer: this story is purely fictional. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is coincidental. Chapter 1. Shadows over Black Hollow. The fog clung to the mountains like a shroud, curling around the gnarled roots of twisted trees. In the heart of Black Hollow, a small settlement of log cabins lay almost forgotten by time, but one cabin at the edge of the valley stood apart. Its walls, darkened by decades of smoke and decay, seemed to breathe with a life of their own. Those who dared approach spoke of cold draughts that whispered through the cracks, and of faint, almost human cries that vanished when met with courage. Inside lived the Marrow family, though few dared call them by name. Legends whispered that they were born under a blood moon, that their children were not raised but claimed by the mountain itself. Locals told stories of travelers who never returned, of smoke rising from the chimney even when the house appeared abandoned, and of eyes, always watching, peering from the shadows. Samuel Marrow, the patriarch, was a man of few words, his face carved with lines that told of grief, rage, and secrets no one could decipher. His wife, Eleanor, moved silently through the cabin, her gaze distant, as if listening to voices no one else could hear. And the children. The children rarely left the house, their laughter hollow, echoing like a memory from another world. Yet curiosity had a way of luring the brave, and tonight a stranger had come to Black Hollow. He thought he was chasing a tale, a story to share with the outside world. What he did not know was that some stories do not wish to be told. Some stories choose their own messengers, and once chosen, there is no turning back. Next, we discover the first secret hidden deep in the Marrow family's attic, a secret so dark it could shatter everything the valley believed about them. Chapter 2. The Attic of Whispers. The stranger's lantern cast trembling shadows along the uneven floorboards as he stepped inside the Marrow cabin. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and something older, sharper, like the decay of secrets left too long untouched. Every creak of the floor echoed, as though the house itself was breathing, watching, waiting. A narrow staircase led upward to the attic, a place the children never dared enter, and where Eleanor's gaze always faltered when mentioned. Something drew the stranger upward, a whispering curiosity, almost like a voice riding the cold wind. As he ascended, the air grew colder, and a thin layer of dust shifted under his feet, revealing the faint imprints of tiny, bare footprints. Footprints that had not touched the floor in years. The attic door groaned as he pushed it open, revealing a room cluttered with old trunks, cobwebbed furniture, and stacks of yellowed papers. But it was the small, cracked mirror propped against the wall that drew his eyes. In its reflection, the stranger swore he saw not his own face, but the pale, hollow-eyed gaze of a child, one that vanished when he blinked. Then he noticed the journals. Hundreds of them, each meticulously kept, detailing nights of screaming, rituals performed under the blood moon, and names crossed out in black ink. A pattern emerged. The Marrow family had kept a record of something terrifying, and these pages were a map of horrors, stitched together in ink and madness. A sudden rustle made him spin. The children were there, at the edge of the shadows, watching, their faces blank, their lips moving in silent murmurs. And then, in a voice that seemed to come from the house itself, a whisper. Some doors, once opened, are never closed. Next, we discover why the Marrow children were never allowed outside, and the chilling truth behind the valley's vanished travelers, Chapter 3. The Children of the Hollow. The stranger froze as the children emerged from the shadows, their movements eerily synchronized, almost inhuman. They circled the attic, whispering words he could not understand, their eyes wide and unblinking, reflecting the lantern light like polished stone. He tried to speak, to ask their names, but no sound left his mouth. It was as if the house itself swallowed his voice. The eldest child, a girl no older than 12, stepped closer. Her gaze was unnerving, too knowing, too sharp for someone so young. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, and the words carried the weight of a warning that chilled him to the bone. The other children stared silently, their expressions unreadable, like shadows waiting to devour the light. In the center of the attic lay a small wooden chest, bound with rusted iron. The girl motioned toward it. "Everything that matters is in there," she whispered. The stranger's hands shook as he lifted the lid, revealing strange artifacts. A collection of tiny carved dolls, jars filled with dried herbs, and a bundle of faded letters sealed in blood-red wax. He opened one of the letters. The ink, though old, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The words told of rites performed to the mountain, of bargains struck with forces beyond the understanding of ordinary men, and beneath it all, a chilling repetition. The mountain takes what it is owed, and those who disobey are claimed. The stranger stumbled back, a cold dread curling around his spine. These were not ordinary children. They were witnesses, guardians, perhaps even participants in horrors that the valley had long whispered about but never dared to face. And outside, the wind carried a low, mournful howl, as if the mountains themselves were warning him to leave before it was too late. Next, we discover the first night the stranger spent in the cabin, and the terrifying sounds that would haunt him long after the candle burned out. Chapter 4. Nightfall in Black Hollow. The candle flickered as shadows danced across the cabin walls, stretching like skeletal fingers. The stranger tried to settle on the creaking floor, but sleep refused him. Every gust of wind rattled the windows, every sigh of the house made him flinch. Outside, the mountains loomed dark and silent, yet somehow alive, as if they were watching, waiting for the night to unfold. A soft tapping began on the attic door. At first he thought it was the wind, but the rhythm grew deliberate, insistent. He rose, lantern trembling in his hands, and pushed the door open. No one was there, only the children's footprints in the dust, leading in circles, stopping abruptly in front of the cracked mirror. His reflection stared back at him. But the eyes weren't his. They were hollow, filled with ancient sorrow, and for a heartbeat he thought the figure moved independently, reaching out from another world. Then came the whispers, soft, urgent, almost pleading. They seemed to echo from the walls themselves. "Leave, leave, or become part of the mountain." He spun toward the chest, hoping for some explanation, only to find one of the carved dolls lying on the floor. Its eyes were painted black, but he swore they glimmered like the mirror's hollow gaze. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had begun to fracture in the house. Each creak of timber and rustle of paper felt magnified, a chorus of unseen presences. When the candle finally guttered and died, the darkness became absolute. And in that darkness he heard it clearly, a low, rasping voice, not of man nor child, but something older, whispering from beneath the cabin floor. "We are hungry." The stranger's breath caught, terror rooting him to the spot. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet curiosity chained him in place, drawn deeper into the horror he had sought to witness. Outside, the mountains hummed, owled with the night wind, carrying the voices of the vanished, the lost, and the damned. Next, we discover what lay beneath the cabin floorboards, a secret even the Marrow children feared to speak aloud. Chapter 5. The Cellar. Beneath the Hollow. The stranger's hands shook as he knelt by the loose floorboards in the attic. Beneath the warped wood, a dark cavity yawned, swallowing the lantern's glow like a hungry mouth. A foul, damp smell rose from the depths, carrying the scent of soil, rot, and something wrong. The children stood behind him, silent, their hollow eyes fixed, warning him without words. He forced himself down the ladder, the wood groaning beneath his weight. The air grew colder, heavier, as if each breath was being stolen by the darkness itself. Shapes began to emerge in the shadows, old chains, rusted tools, and faint, dried stains of something unmistakably crimson. He realized, with a chill that seeped into his bones, that this was no ordinary cellar. It had been a chamber of secrets, of rituals long whispered by the valley folk, but never spoken aloud. A faint scratching echoed from a corner. The stranger's lantern flickered, revealing tiny handprints pressed into the dirt. Too small, too precise, as if made by children who had never truly left. And then he saw it. A stone altar, etched with symbols that pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat. On it lay a bundle wrapped in cloth. Hesitating, he unwrapped it. Inside was a diary, pages yellowed with age, ink smeared and almost illegible. The first entry made his stomach turn. The mountain demands sacrifice, and we obey. Those who resist do not leave. Each page revealed the Marrow family's descent into obsession, their rituals growing darker with every blood moon, the children's innocence fading with each ceremony, until nothing human remained in them. Suddenly, a whisper curled around his ear. "Do you wish to join us, or become what we claim?" The stranger spun, but no one was there. Only the children, their faces pressed against the shadows above, watching him with eyes that belonged to something older than memory itself. Next, we discover the true purpose of the blood-red wax letters and the pact that bound the Marrow family to the mountain itself. Chapter 6. The Pact of the Mountain. The stranger's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages of the diary, his lantern casting shadows that seemed alive, writhing along the cellar walls. The blood-red wax letters, now scattered around him, told a story older and darker than he could have imagined. The Marrow family had not merely lived in the mountains, they had belonged to them. Every action, every ritual, every life they touched was part of a pact forged long before the stranger had set foot in Black Hollow. The entries described a covenant with the mountain itself, a force both ancient and malevolent. In exchange for power, knowledge, and protection, the family had vowed obedience. The mountain demanded the souls of outsiders, children, and even family members who faltered, and with each offering, the Marrow children were shaped, twisted, and bound to the mountain's will. A gust of wind rattled the cellar door. The stranger shivered as a whisper drifted from the shadows. "We serve the mountain, and it serves no one." Eleanor's voice, distant yet present, recited verses from the letters, words that seemed to echo with a resonance older than the cabin itself. The children moved closer, circling him, their hollow eyes reflecting the flickering lantern flame like twin pools of darkness. Suddenly, the diary revealed a shocking truth. The patriarch, Samuel Marrow, had never intended for outsiders to survive. The stranger was not a visitor. He was the next piece of the pact, the offering foretold by the blood-red ink. The mountain had chosen him, as it had chosen every lost soul whispered about in the valley's dark legends. A deep rumble shook the cellar, and the stones beneath the stranger's feet seemed to pulse with life. The shadows stretched, forming shapes that were human and not, reaching toward him with tendrils of night. Fear rooted him to the spot, but curiosity, the fatal curiosity of a storyteller, kept him from fleeing. Next, we discover the first blood moon ceremony, and how the Marrow children became vessels of the mountain's ancient hunger. Chapter 7. The Blood Moon Ceremony. The night sky outside Black Hollow was a deep, bruised red, the rising blood moon casting its eerie glow over the mountains. The stranger, still trembling from the cellar revelations, had no time to react as the children led him back to the attic. Their movements were precise, almost ritualistic, like dancers performing an ancient choreography he could not understand. On the floor, the wooden chest now lay open, revealing instruments and objects he dared not touch. Carved symbols seemed to shimmer in the candlelight, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the stranger's quickening heartbeat. The eldest child began to chant softly, a language lost to time, while the others repeated, their voices weaving a tapestry of sound that made the walls vibrate. From the shadows, Samuel Marrow appeared, his face calm but eyes ablaze with fervor. "Tonight," he whispered, "the mountain chooses. Tonight, we honor the pact." He gestured toward the stranger, and a cold dread filled the room. This was no ordinary ceremony. It was a binding, a rite to test the chosen outsider's resolve, his fear, his very soul. The children moved in a circle around the stranger, raising the carved dolls as if they were extensions of themselves. Eleanor appeared beside Samuel, her hands steady, as she poured a thin crimson liquid into a small stone basin. The smell of iron and earth filled the air, and the stranger felt the gravity of the mountain pressing down, a living force that demanded obedience and terror alike. A sudden, unearthly howl echoed from the forest outside. The children stiffened, eyes glowing faintly under the blood moon, and the stranger realized they were no longer children in the sense he understood. They were vessels, conduits of the mountain's hunger, and tonight they would show him why no outsider ever survived the Marrow family's rituals. Next, we discover what happens when the mountain's hunger reaches into the stranger's soul, and why some secrets of Black Hollow are better left buried. Chapter 8. The Mountain's Grip. The stranger stumbled backward as the chanting intensified, the children's voices merging into a single, unearthly hum that seemed to reverberate through the very bones of the cabin. The blood moon's light poured through the attic window, bathing the room in a crimson glow, and the shadows began to twist unnaturally, stretching across walls, ceiling, and floor, as though the house itself had become alive. A cold, invisible hand seemed to clutch at his chest. Fear gnawed at him, but it wasn't just terror. Something darker, older, more insidious pressed into his mind. Whispers echoed in a language he could not understand, voices that promised power, knowledge, and, most dangerously, escape, if only he obeyed. The stranger's heart pounded as he realized the mountain was reaching for him, pulling at his very soul. Samuel Marrow's face loomed in the candlelight, calm yet terrible. "It chooses," he said almost gently. "It reaches for the one who trespasses, and tests what lies within." The stranger felt himself swaying as though the floor itself had become liquid, and the children's eyes, black pools of something not quite human, held him captive. The eldest girl stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. In that moment, he felt a strange warmth, almost a connection, as though the mountain was probing his fears, memories, even his very thoughts. Then the warmth turned icy, twisting his mind with visions of the valley's long history. Travelers swallowed by shadows, screams buried beneath roots, and the children themselves, twisted by rituals under moons of blood. The stranger's knees buckled. He wanted to flee, to escape the pull of the mountain, but the power in the attic was absolute. The whispers grew louder, circling his mind, bending his will. Every instinct screamed that the Marrows had been guardians of something too ancient to comprehend, something that had waited centuries to claim another soul. And just as he felt himself teetering on the edge of surrender, a loud crack echoed from below. Something moved beneath the cabin floor, a weighty, slithering presence that stirred with intelligence and hunger. The stranger realized that the mountain's grip was only the beginning, and what lay beneath Black Hollow hungered for more than just fear. Next, we discover the monstrous secret lurking beneath the cabin, the ancient force the Marrows served, and why no outsider ever left alive. Chapter 9. The Horror Beneath. A deep rumble shook the cabin as the stranger's lantern quivered in his hands. From the shadows beneath the floorboards, a low, guttural sound emerged, wet and rattling, as if the earth itself were breathing. Something moved there, something vast and ancient, its presence pressing against the walls, the roof, even the stranger's chest. Fear gnawed at him, primal and unrelenting, yet he could not tear his gaze away. The children circled him, chanting in the forgotten tongue, their voices weaving a rhythm that seemed to coax the darkness upward. The eldest girl's eyes glimmered with a knowledge far beyond her years, a calm mastery that belied the terror in the stranger's heart. Then, from the open floorboards, a shape began to rise, black as midnight, slick and fluid in movement, yet somehow formed, like molten shadows twisted into a grotesque, semi-human figure. Its face, or what resembled one, was featureless, save for a wide, gaping mouth that exhaled a sickly, sour breath. It moved with unnatural grace, limbs bending in impossible ways, stretching toward the stranger with intent, hunger, and intelligence. The stranger's instincts screamed to run, but the mountain's influence held him in place, drawing him closer to the edge of understanding and madness. Samuel Marrow stepped forward, calm amidst the chaos. "It is the mountain's firstborn," he said softly, "the sentinel that ensures our obedience and feeds our pact. It has waited long for a new soul, and tonight it tests yours." The stranger could hear a wet, sucking sound as the creature's appendages probed the attic floor, reaching for him like inky fingers. Panic surged through him. He lunged toward the stairs, but the children's voices swelled, chanting louder, binding him with words older than memory. Every heartbeat thumped like a drum in his chest, a countdown to the inevitable. The sentinel beneath him writhed, eyes, if they could be called that, flaring with a predatory glow. And in that moment he realized the Marrows were not monsters. They were stewards of a force far worse, and it had claimed them first. Next, we discover how the stranger confronts the sentinel and whether he can survive the first night in Black Hollow. Deep in the misty hollows of 1871 Alabama, where the Appalachian Mountains rise like silent sentinels, there existed a family so twisted, so shrouded in shadows, that the locals dared not speak their name. Whispers of unspeakable rituals, vanished travelers, and secrets buried beneath blood-soaked soil haunted the valleys. Children of the hill grew up in silence, eyes hollow, mouths sealed by fear. And something far older than man itself seemed to stir in the darkened woods. No outsider could enter their domain and live unchanged, and no letter ever left their cabin without carrying a warning hidden in its ink. Tonight, we unravel the story of the family that time almost forgot, a tale of obsession, madness, and horror that will leave your mind racing long after the last word. Disclaimer: this story is purely fictional. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is coincidental. Chapter 10. Trial of the Sentinel. The stranger's heart pounded like a war drum as the black, writhing sentinel rose from the floorboards, its inky limbs twisting and wriggling like serpents. The attic walls seemed to close in around him, the shadows stretching unnaturally, alive with intent. Each breath he drew felt stolen by the house, as though the mountain itself were siphoning life from him. The eldest girl stepped forward, her hollow eyes fixed on him. "To survive," she whispered, "you must face it, and answer for your trespass." Her words were calm, almost soothing, but carried the weight of inevitability. The stranger realized the sentinel was more than a creature. It was a test, a force that could see his fears, his doubts, even his regrets. The sentinel lunged, fluid and fast, brushing the stranger with cold, sticky tendrils that made his skin crawl. Every touch burned with icy fire, probing his mind, forcing memories to surface, his mistakes, his cowardice, the times he had ignored warnings. He stumbled backward, terror clawing at his chest, and in that instant he understood the rules. Fear was fuel. Hesitation was death. He gathered the last fragments of courage, staring into the featureless maw of the sentinel. Summoning every ounce of strength, he reached deep into himself and whispered truths aloud, admissions of guilt, of failure, of courage he had never acknowledged. The sentinel recoiled slightly, hissing as if surprised by his defiance. Its inky limbs flailed, but the stranger pressed on, moving forward despite the icy tendrils that scraped at him like knives. Finally, the sentinel shrieked, a sound like stone grinding against bone, and retreated into the shadows beneath the floorboards. The children stopped chanting, their voices fading, leaving the stranger gasping in the attic's oppressive silence. Samuel Marrow's face appeared in the candleage, unreadable, yet approving. "Few survive the first night," he murmured. "Fewer still understand what it means to endure the mountain's will." The stranger sank to the floor, trembling, knowing this was only the beginning. Black Hollow had claimed a piece of him already, and the mountain's hunger was far from satisfied. Next, we discover the hidden history of the Marrow family and the bloodline that bound the children to the mountain itself. Chapter 11. The Marrow Legacy. The stranger sat in the attic, still trembling, the echoes of the sentinel's screech reverberating in his mind. Samuel Marrow moved toward an old, cobwebbed cabinet and pulled out a brittle, leather-bound tome. Its pages were thick with age, ink faded but legible. He handed it to the stranger, who hesitated, fearing what knowledge it might contain. "This," Samuel said quietly, "is the Marrow family record. It begins long before you ever walked these mountains. Our blood is tied to the mountain's hunger and to its will." The stranger turned the pages, seeing names crossed out, dates marked in crimson, and symbols etched with obsessive precision. Generations of Marrows had been bound to the mountain through a pact sealed under blood moons, each child born with the mountain's mark, a latent hunger coursing through their veins. Each ritual, each offering, ensured the children grew into vessels, guardians of the mountain's ancient force. Eleanor appeared, her eyes softer now, but shadowed with centuries of understanding. "We are not evil," she said, her voice trembling. "We are the mountain's stewards. Those who defy it are consumed, but those who obey survive, in body or in mind." The stranger's stomach churned. He realized the children weren't merely victims, they were participants, trained from birth to serve a purpose older than memory. The Marrow family's obsession was not born of madness alone. It was survival, devotion, and fear intertwined, a slow-burning inheritance that passed from generation to generation. Samuel leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The mountain chooses who will bear its will, and it has chosen you. You have survived the sentinel, but the trials are far from over. Each night brings a new reckoning." The stranger felt the weight of centuries pressing down, understanding for the first time the true nature of Black Hollow. The valley's horror was not just in its rituals or its creatures, it was in the inevitability, the inescapable legacy that bound every Marrow to the mountain's hunger. Next, we discover the first full moon night after the sentinel's trial, and how the mountain's influence begins to twist the stranger's mind. Chapter 12. The Mountain's Whisper. The stranger awoke to a low, humming vibration that seemed to rise from the very walls of the cabin. Outside, the full moon hung swollen and red above the peaks, its light spilling into the attic and casting the children in sharp, elongated shadows. Even in sleep, the mountain had reached for him. He staggered to the window, gripping the sill as a whisper crawled through his mind. Not words, not language, but a force that pressed against his thoughts. It was seductive, cold and patient, a promise of power and understanding. "Yield, or be broken," it urged. The stranger recoiled, but the voice was persistent, threading through memories he had long buried, nudging his fears and doubts into sharp relief. The children sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, murmuring the mountain's hymn. The eldest girl's lips moved deliberately, shaping words older than any man could remember. With each note, the stranger felt himself slipping, mind and body bending under the gravity of a will far older than humanity. Samuel Marrow entered quietly, watching with a mixture of pride and sadness. "The mountain speaks to all who remain," he said. "It reaches inside, prying open corners of the soul. Few can resist its pull." Eleanor placed her hand on the stranger's shoulder, steadying him, yet the touch only seemed to amplify the whispers. A sudden movement in the corner caught his eye. Shadows pooled and shifted, forming shapes that seemed to breathe and watch. They were remnants of those the Marrows had once offered, trapped echoes of past trespassers, now bound to the valley's hunger. Panic surged through him, but the mountain's whisper wrapped around his mind like ivy, drawing him closer, teasing him with the promise that resistance was impossible. By dawn, he knew something had changed. The stranger could feel the mountain in his veins, a coal, the hunger curling in his chest, a shadow of the same force that had shaped the Marrow children. He had survived the sentinel, endured the attic, but now he realized Survival was only the first step. To leave Black Hollow, he would have to resist the mountain itself, a force older than mountains, older than men. Next, we discover how the stranger struggles against the mountain's influence and the horrifying transformation that begins within him. Chapter 13. The First Transformation. The stranger woke to a strange heaviness in his limbs. The night's whispers had not ended. They had burrowed deep into his mind, threading through memories, fears, and instincts. Every mirror he glanced into reflected a stranger's face, pale, hollow-eyed, and tense with a shadow that was not entirely his own. The mountain had begun its work. The children watched silently as he stumbled through the cabin. Their expressions were unreadable, almost expectant, as though they were witnessing a ritual they had performed countless times before. The eldest girl stepped forward, placing a cool hand on his forehead. The sensation was not warmth, it was awareness, like the mountain's pulse transferred through her touch. He trembled, feeling his own thoughts bending, reshaping under forces he could neither name nor resist. Samuel Marrow's voice echoed from the doorway. The mountain does not take gently. It does not bargain. It begins with subtlety. Flesh, thought, instinct. It seeks to claim a soul entirely. The stranger's stomach twisted as he realized the truth. He was changing, becoming something both human and other, a hybrid shaped by the mountain's hunger. The first signs were small but undeniable. His hearing sharpened to the point that even the rustle of the attic's boards screamed in his ears. Shadows seemed to shift toward him, no longer merely reflections of the cabin, but active observers. And worst of all, he felt a gnawing curiosity he could not suppress, a desire to look deeper into the forbidden, to follow the whispers that promised secrets of unimaginable power. Eleanor approached, holding a jar of herbs and a small carved talisman. "Resistance alone is not enough," she whispered. "The mountain bends you, but your choices, your courage, decide whether you survive or join what it consumes." The stranger's pulse raced as he realized the truth. His will was under siege, and every decision he made was a test, every hesitation a step closer to becoming part of Black Hollow itself. By nightfall, he felt it fully, the shadow of the mountain inside him, twisting his thoughts, sharpening his senses, and filling him with a hunger that was not his own. The mountain was patient. It had claimed generations of Marrows, and now it claimed him, not by death, but by transformation. Next, we discover the first real choice the stranger must make to retain his humanity, or lose himself completely to the mountain's ancient hunger. Chapter 14. The Choice of Shadows. The stranger paced the attic, every step heavy with the mountain's unseen weight. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent, tugging at his mind with delicate precision. He felt them in his bones, in his blood, reminding him that the mountain did not merely observe. It demanded obedience, claimed loyalty, and punished hesitation. The eldest girl appeared silently beside him, her hollow eyes calm but piercing. "Tonight," she said softly, "you will choose. To resist is to risk being consumed. To obey is to survive in some form." Her words held no judgment, only a simple, cold truth. The stranger realized that the mountain's patience was endless, its hunger eternal, and the choice was his alone. He thought of the children, their small bodies twisted by the rituals, yet alive in ways beyond ordinary human understanding. He thought of Samuel and Eleanor, their devotion not cruel, but a necessary surrender to forces older than memory. And he considered the sentinel, the darkness beneath the floorboards, the shadows that had whispered promises and threats alike. His hands shook as he looked down at the carved dolls on the floor, each a vessel for a past soul, each a reminder that Black Hollow's hunger spared no one. The whispers pressed into his mind. Obey, or become part of the mountain. Then he remembered the talisman Eleanor had given him, the herbs meant to anchor him, however briefly. For a moment, he closed his eyes, drew a deep, trembling breath, and reached into himself. The mountain tugged, testing, probing, promising power and torment. He knew instinctively that whatever he chose now would define not just his fate, but whether the valley's curse would claim another life, or another soul. The attic fell silent. The children waited, Samuel's shadow looming in the candlelight, and the mountain's presence pressed around him. Vast, patient, eternal. The stranger's heart hammered. He had only seconds to decide, bend or resist, obedience or rebellion, survival or annihilation. Next, we discover the stranger's choice and the terrifying consequences that unfold when defying the mountain. Chapter 15. Defiance and Consequence. The stranger's hands trembled as he weighed his options. The mountain's whispers coiled around his mind like serpents, promising power, knowledge, and survival, but only if he obeyed completely. He glanced at the children, their hollow eyes unblinking, and then at Samuel and Eleanor, standing like sentinels of an impossible legacy. A cold fury rose within him. He would not become a tool of this ancient hunger. He gripped the talisman tightly, feeling the faint warmth of the herbs against his palm. Closing his eyes, he whispered a defiance that was almost a prayer. "I am not yours. I am not part of this hunger." The mountain roared within his mind, a deafening, crushing presence, but he held firm. Every nerve screamed against the pressure, every memory of terror clawed at his sanity, but still he resisted. The children's chanting faltered, their synchronized movements breaking for the first time. The eldest girl's expression flickered with something unreadable. Fear, awe, or sorrow, he could not tell. Samuel's eyes widened, but he did not intervene. He only watched as the stranger's will met the mountain's ancient force head-on. Suddenly, the sentinel beneath the floorboards shrieked, a sound that rattled every beam of the cabin. Its black, writhing form surged upward, limbs lashing violently, yet the stranger remained steady. He felt the talisman's warmth spread through him, forming a barrier, however fragile, between himself and the mountain's relentless grasp. And then, silence. The whispers receded, the shadows slackened, and for the first time the stranger felt space within his own mind. A small, defiant freedom. Yet the price was clear. The mountain had tested him, and though he survived, it had marked him. The hunger had not been fully banished. It lingered, waiting, patient, eternal. Samuel stepped forward, a faint smile on his weathered face. "Few defy the mountain and remain unclaimed. You have courage, but remember, the valley always remembers, and the mountain always hungers." The stranger sank to the floor, exhausted, knowing that his defiance had only postponed the inevitable. Black Hollow was still alive, still hungry, and its ancient shadow would follow him beyond the cabin walls. Next, we discover the history of Black Hollow's vanished travelers and the chilling truth of why the valley has remained isolated for centuries. Chapter 16. The Vanished of Black Hollow. The stranger, still trembling from the sentinel's trial, sat by the attic window, watching the blood-red moon dip behind the peaks. The valley below seemed alive, dark ridges folding into one another like sleeping beasts. Samuel Marrow moved beside him, his eyes distant, as if peering through time itself. "You must understand," Samuel began, voice low and measured. "The valley has always been hungry. Long before my family claimed it, others wandered here, and never left. Travelers, merchants, even those seeking fortune or solace, they vanished without trace. Some say the mountains claimed them. We know better." He led the stranger down the narrow staircase into the cellar, revealing walls etched with faint symbols. Each mark represented a soul lost to the hollow, names, dates, and cryptic warnings carved by generations of Marrows. The stranger's stomach churned as he recognized the blood-red wax letters scattered on the floor. Each letter was a record of an offering, a ledger of lives surrendered to the mountain's hunger. Eleanor joined them, holding one of the old letters delicately. "The mountain does not take lightly. It waits for outsiders to stumble, to seek answers, or to trespass. And then it tests them, like it tested you. Some survive, most do not. Those who fail become echoes, bound to the valley, never to leave." The stranger shivered, recalling the shadows beneath the floorboards, the sentinel's lashing tendrils, and the children's hollow eyes. Every horror he had witnessed was part of a larger pattern, a web of despair spun over centuries. Black Hollow was not merely a cursed place, it was a living entity, feeding, remembering and punishing, an eternal hunger lurking in the Appalachian darkness. A distant howl rose from the mountains, a mournful lament that carried the weight of all the lost travelers, the saint. Ranger understood now. The valley's history was not folklore nor exaggeration. It was a ledger of pain, a warning etched into the very bones of the mountains. And he, defiant though he had been, was now irrevocably bound to its legacy, a witness to centuries of hunger and madness. Next, we discover the secrets hidden in the Marrow journals and the forbidden knowledge that could either save the stranger or doom him forever. Chapter 17. The Forbidden Knowledge. The stranger sat cross-legged in the dim light of the attic, the Marrow journals spread before him like a map of centuries-long madness. Each page was a tapestry of ritual, obsession, and secrets that no outsider had ever been allowed to see. The words seemed to pulse with life, whispering to him in a cadence that was almost hypnotic. Samuel Marrow watched silently. "These journals contain the knowledge that binds us to the mountain," he said. "Forbidden knowledge. Those who read too deeply risk more than fear. They risk themselves. And yet the mountain allows you to glimpse it because it tests not only courage, but curiosity." The stranger flipped through the pages carefully. Symbols twisted and coiled like living serpents, incantations called to powers he could barely comprehend. He discovered diagrams of blood-red circles, talismans, and the mountain's pulse mapped in strange notations. Each entry told a story of offerings made, sacrifices chosen, and children transformed into vessels of the valley's ancient hunger. A sudden chill swept through the attic, and he felt the mountain's presence tighten around him. The journals revealed the true mechanism of the pact. It was not merely about survival, it was about submission, knowledge, and control. The mountain fed on obedience, terror, and the curiosity of those who dared to uncover its secrets. And in the wrong hands, even understanding the ritual could summon forces that would consume the world outside Black Hollow. The eldest girl hovered nearby, her eyes still hollow but softer now. "Knowledge is a gift," she whispered, "but it is also a curse. You can see what no outsider ever has, and survive. But beware. Curiosity can be as dangerous as the mountain itself." The stranger's mind reeled. He realized that his survival depended not just on resisting the mountain's hunger, but on understanding it, on walking a narrow line between defiance and submission. The Marrow journals were a key, a map, but also a warning. One wrong step could doom him utterly, and perhaps release the mountain's wrath beyond the valley. Next, we discover the stranger's plan to use the forbidden knowledge to challenge the mountain and the horrifying risk it entails. Chapter 18. Confronting the Mountain. The stranger stood in the attic, the Marrow journals clutched tightly against his chest. The blood-red moon hung high above Black Hollow, its light streaming through the cracked window, bathing the cabin in a spectral glow. Tonight he would act. He had learned the rituals, deciphered the symbols, and understood the mountain's hunger in ways no outsider ever had. Yet understanding was only the first step. Action was far more dangerous. The children watched silently, their hollow eyes fixed on him, not with judgment, but anticipation. Samuel and Eleanor's faces were unreadable, calm, yet charged with an energy older than memory itself. They had seen countless trespassers, countless challengers, but none had survived the first night as he had. Few had ever dared to challenge the mountain. The stranger arranged the talismans and herbs exactly as the journals prescribed. Incantations passed his lips, strange sounds that felt alien yet precise, echoing through the cabin's walls. The mountain responded instantly, the attic trembled, shadows coiled like living serpents, and the sentinel beneath the floorboards hissed, lashing at the boundaries he had drawn. Pain shot through his chest, cold and burning simultaneously, as if the mountain were clawing directly at his soul. The whispers intensified, tugging at his mind, promising oblivion if he faltered. But he pushed forward, repeating the ritual, focusing on the fragile barrier of talismans, knowledge, and willpower. Each word, each gesture, drew the mountain's hunger into a visible, tangible shape, an immense, writhing shadow above the attic floor. The children's chants blended with his, forming a harmony of intent, of resistance and understanding. Samuel stepped back, murmuring, "Few outsiders can summon the mountain into sight. Fewer can survive it." The stranger's pulse raced, sweat dripping down his brow, yet he felt a strange clarity. He was no longer merely surviving. He was challenging. The shadow writhed violently, black as the night itself, and then, with a deafening shriek that rattled the beams, it recoiled. The mountain had tested him, clawed at him, sought to bend him entirely, but for the first time, it faltered. A sliver of control, however temporary, belonged to the stranger. Next, we discover the aftermath of the confrontation and the horrifying realization of what the mountain truly desires. Chapter 19. The Mountain's True Hunger. The attic lay in eerie silence after the confrontation. Shadows stretched thin across the walls, and the blood-red moon began its slow descent behind the mountains. The stranger's chest heaved, exhaustion and fear mingling with an unfamiliar exhilaration. For the first time, he felt he had wrested some control from the mountain, yet deep in his bones, he knew this was far from over. Samuel Marrow approached, his eyes glinting with solemn understanding. "You have seen its strength, felt its hunger, but you have not seen its desire." He motioned to the floorboards, where the sentinel had retreated into darkness. "The mountain does not simply consume. It seeks companionship, not in body alone, but in will. It hungers for those who can think, who can choose, and bend them to its endless purpose. That is why the Marrows exist." Eleanor's gaze softened as she spoke. "It wants a steward, someone who understands it, someone who can carry its hunger without breaking. Few are chosen, fewer still endure the trial. You have survived, yes, but now you must decide if you will bear the mountain's weight, or leave and carry the shadow of this place forever in your mind." The stranger felt the pulse of the mountain thrumming through the cabin like an invisible heartbeat beneath his feet. The sentinel's hissing seemed to echo in his chest, and the whispers returned, not threatening this time, but persuasive, coaxing, seductive. Every instinct screamed that the mountain would never let him leave unchanged. A chill ran down his spine as the eldest girl stepped close. Every choice has a consequence. To refuse is to remember. To accept is to endure. She handed him one of the carved dolls, a vessel he now understood was both a key and a warning. The mountain's hunger was not just survival or fear, it was legacy, obedience, and the endless repetition of the valley's ancient will. The stranger realized then the full horror. The mountain's hunger was eternal, unrelenting, patient beyond measure. Even if he left, even if he survived, a piece of black hollow would remain inside him, waiting, always, to call him back. Next, we discover the stranger's final choice, and whether Black Hollow claims another soul or allows him to escape its grasp. Chapter 20. The Final Choice. The stranger stood alone in the attic, the blood-red moon now a pale, fading orb beyond the mountains. The cabin was silent, but the pulse of the mountain thrummed beneath the floorboards, like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward him, every whisper tugged at the edges of his mind, urging, coaxing, demanding. He held the carved doll tightly, a talisman of knowledge, defiance, and warning. The mountain's hunger had tested him, transformed him, and now it waited for his answer. To stay was to accept the ancient pact, to become a steward like the Marrows, bound in perpetuity to the valley's dark will. To leave was to resist, to walk away with his humanity intact, yet carrying the memory, the fear, and a lingering piece of the mountain's hunger inside him, forever. The eldest girl watched silently, her hollow eyes reflecting both sorrow and respect. Samuel and Eleanor remained in the shadows, patient, knowing, their faces unreadable. The sentinel beneath the floorboards stirred once more, black limbs twitching, sensing the final decision. The stranger's pulse raced, every muscle tense, mind burning with the weight of choice. He closed his eyes and drew a deep, shuddering breath. He felt the mountain inside him, the pull, the hunger, the whispers threading through his veins. Then, with the last ounce of willpower, he made his decision. A quiet, resolute defiance passed through him. He would leave, carry the mountain's shadow as a burden, but not surrender his soul. The shadows recoiled. The sentinel hissed, retreating into the depths of the floorboards. The whispers faded, leaving a silence so complete it was almost unbearable. The children's eyes softened, their forms flickering like candlelight. Samuel's lips pressed into a thin line. Eleanor's hand rested lightly on the stranger's shoulder. No words were spoken. None were needed. As dawn broke over Black Hollow, the stranger stepped outside, the valley sprawling before him, mist curling like fingers across the peaks. The mountain was patient, eternal, and its hunger would wait. But he had survived. He carried the weight of its memory, the echoes of the children, and the shadow of its ancient hunger. Yet he walked free, a survivor, marked forever by the valley's dark embrace. The mountain would call again, and he would remember. Black Hollow was eternal, patient, and unyielding. But so, for now, was he. The end.